Is it?
Yes? Hi? What's up?
Oh my God.
Is it 3 or 5?
How did you get 8 for the number 2 for the D? Like, because that's the degrees, right?
Yeah, these, you add up the 4 plus 3 plus 1.
So in this one we have...
Oh, so the degrees is the exponents.
The degrees is adding the exponents
Oh.
of the term.
Oh.
Nope.
Why not?
So the degree is
1.
going to be number 4. Is this in standard form? No. So if we put it in standard form, we go highest to lowest. So it's going to be x to the 12th plus 6x to the 11th minus x to the 10th plus 4x cubed. Okay? So that's standard form. Okay? And then the degree, what's the degree? The degree is going to be the highest, the sum of the highest exponents, 12. And then what is the leading coefficient? It'll be 1, because it's the number in front of that. So that's 1. Okay? So that's going to be the leading coefficient. Alright, so you kind of getting the idea between term, degree, leading coefficient?
You have to
Alright.
read it where it's k of x, or is that just another...
Kind of knowing what we just did, we're going to start looking at how to simplify. So we have two different options. We have add, subtract as one, or we have like multiply, okay? So add and subtract, what you're looking for is you're looking for like terms. You can only add and subtract the coefficients of like terms, okay? So that means the variable and the exponent must be the same for you to add or subtract it, okay? So if I look here, when you see these, you guys, there's a difference between 1 and 2, and I need everyone to see this because this is going to be probably the number one mistake you might see on a test or in your homework. If you notice, this is in parentheses, and it's adding, and then it has a whole other set of parentheses, right? Does an addition, an adding or addition, does it change the signs of anything? Adding does not, right? Adding does not change the sign. So if I'm adding the x cubed, I'm adding 6x, everything, the signs will stay the same. However, if you notice this one, I'm subtracting, right? So what do I know about when I subtract?
It's a negative 3x to the cubed, negative 2x squared, plus x, negative x.
Right, this negative right here is subtracting each one of those terms separately. So this negative is going to get distributed to each one of these elements, okay? So when you have a negative and then you have something in parentheses, that negative has to get distributed. So it's like saying negative 3x cubed minus 2x squared plus x minus 7. Okay? So I kind of want to stress that. You're going to have two options here. You're going to have where it's a plus or a minus. And if it's the minus, you got to make sure that minus gets put to every single term. That's going to be the number one mistake. Okay? Alright, so when you're adding or subtracting, all you're doing is you're adding or subtracting the coefficients for the like terms. So I'm looking for where my variable and my exponent are the same, and then I'm merging the coefficients together. Okay? So if I look at this one here, I have an x cubed, I have an x squared, I have an x, and I have a constant. Over here I have an x cubed, an x squared, and a constant. So I'm going to find I'm going to look to my first exponent, and I'm going to say, do I have any other x cubed? Well, I'll go over here and I'm like, oh, I have an x cubed right there. So I have a 2x cubed, I'm adding an x cubed, okay? So I have a 2x cubed, and I'm adding an x cubed. How many x cubes do I have all together then? Right, so this would be 3x cubed, okay? I have a minus 5x squared. Do I have any other x squareds?
Yes.
I have a plus 6x squared, right? So what does a minus x squared and a 6x squared equal? Just a plus x squared, right? So then I have a plus 3x. Are there any other x's? Are there any other 3x's? Any other x's, I mean? No. So then this just becomes plus 3x. And then I look at my constants. I have a minus 9 and I have a plus 11. So what are my constants equal? A plus 2. Okay? So when you see these, you have to realize that you can only put together the like terms, which means my variable and my exponent are the same. And then at that point, I add or subtract the coefficients in front of them. Does that make sense what I just said? Okay, so I have a 2x cubed. I'm trying to find another x cubed here. Oh, look at that. I have a 2 and I have a 1. That equals 3. So I find my x squares. I have a -5 and I have a 6. I add those together. That equals 1. So you see how that is? So you don't do anything with the variable and the exponent. Those don't change. It's just the coefficient in front of the variable and the exponent that changes. So if I'm adding x cubed, it stays x cubed. It doesn't change like an x6 or an x9 or anything like that. Okay, so don't change the variable and the exponent, just change the coefficients in front of it. Does that make sense? Alright, same thing when I'm subtracting it, but that negative sign gets distributed to each element. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this as 8x cubed minus 5x plus 1. Okay, so now, this is the cubed here. So now I'm going to go through and say, okay, I have an 8x cubed. Do I have any other x cubes? I have an 8x cubed, and what else do I have?
3x.
I have a negative 3x cubed. Okay? So that, when I put them together, become what?
5x cubed.
5x cubed. Okay? Then I go down the line. Okay, well here I have an x. Well, let's see if I have an x squared first. I go down. Okay, I have an x squared here. I only have one of them, so I'm just going to rewrite the negative 2x squared. Okay, and that just becomes negative 2x squared. And then I go down, I have a negative 5x, and then I have an x. Okay, and sometimes students like to just cross them out as they're working with them so they know that they've done that. You can decide if that's what you want to do or not. And then I add them together. What's negative 5 plus 1?
Negative 4x.
Equals negative 4x. And then I have a 1 and a 7, negative 7, so plus 1 minus 7. So that equals negative 6. Okay? So when you add and subtract, you just find your like terms, meaning your variable and your exponents are the same, and then you add and subtract the coefficients that are there. And then that just becomes your answer. And then you put it in standard form. Okay? Does that make sense for adding and subtracting?
The way it turned out, it was already in standard.
Yeah, it was already in standard form that way. Okay? Some questions on adding and subtracting? Alright, so let's move into multiplying. Alright, so multiplying, you guys are used to the distributive property, right? If I had, let's say, 3x plus 1, I would take my 3 and multiply it to the x, and then I take my 3 and multiply it to the 1, right? And then this would be 3x plus 3. Alright, that's the basic distributive property, correct? Okay? Alright, so then what we have next is where we have a polynomial times a polynomial. So you're going to have multiple distributive properties. You do the same thing that you did before, but you take the first term to multiply all three, and then take the second term and multiply all three. Okay? So we'll start with the x. I'm going to take the x and multiply it to each one of these. Okay? So if I take the x and multiply it to x squared, I'm going to use the rule of multiplication with exponents, right? Because I'm multiplying two exponents together. What's the rule of multiplying exponents? You add them, right? So x times x squared becomes what?
2x cubed.
X cubed. Okay? If I had a coefficient in front of it, I'd multiply those numbers. But I don't have a coefficient, it's just a 1. So that it just becomes x cubed. Okay? Now I take the x to negative 2x. So x times the negative 2x is going to be negative 2x squared. Got it. And then I have an x times a 3. What does that become? Plus 3x. Alright, so now that I did that, now I need to do the next one. So, I'll take the negative 5, and the key is that's a negative 5. Okay, don't lose the negative. And I'm going to multiply it to each term. So negative 5 times the x squared becomes what? Negative 5x squared. Okay? Then I take the negative 5 to multiply it to the negative 2x. Well, negative 5 times a negative 2 becomes 10. And then I have an x, so plus 10x. And then negative 5 times a 3, minus 15. Okay? So, do you see how I'm just doing one term to multiply to all, and then the next one to multiply to all, and then I just write it out like that, right? And at this point, you then apply the addition or subtraction rules and just go ahead and combine like terms. So I'm going to look to see, okay, I have an x cubed here. Do I have any other x cubes?
No.
I do not, so I'll just write x cubed first. Then I have a negative 2x squared. Do I have any other x squareds? Let's see, I have a negative 2 and I have a negative 5. So how many x squareds do I have? Negative 7 x squareds. Okay? Then I take a 3x and I add it to a 10x. What do I get? Plus 13x. And then I go down and I just have negative 15 for a constant, minus 15. And that would be my answer.
Could you put parentheses around it and try to do it like what we did up there?
There'd be no reason to do that, because you want to get it, you want to separate it out. If you put in parentheses, you're grouping it versus trying to separate it out into one. Okay?
Alright.
Alright, so when you're multiplying, you have one extra step in which each term has to get multiplied, and then you go to the second step of adding or subtracting where you merge then the like terms. Does that make sense? Okay? Alright, so looking at number 4, how is number 4 a little bit different? Yeah, you have like 3 different ones here, right? So where you do one set first and then do it to the next set, okay? So we're going to do this, we'll do the first one here first. We'll do the x to the x and the x to the 1, and then we'll go negative 5 to the x and then negative 5 to the 1. So let's do that one first. So x times x is x squared. X times 1 is x. Then I have a negative 5 to the x, and that becomes a negative 5x. And I have a negative 5 to 1, that becomes negative 5. Okay? Before I multiply it, this is key. This is key. Before I take this to multiply to that, I want to simplify it first. Okay? So let's simplify this first. How do I simplify it? I combine like terms. Okay? So I'm going to get x squared, I'll get a minus 4x, and I'll get a minus 5. Does everyone see how I did that? Right? Then I'm going to bring this one down here, and then I'll multiply that out. Okay? So this will be x plus 3. So before you do the multiplication, simplify. So simplify first. Okay? And then multiply again. Okay? So then I'm going to take my x and I'll multiply it to each one of these. Okay? So x times, it doesn't matter which order you do it in. I like doing the 2 to the 3 versus 3 to the 2 because I just think it's less work. So x times x squared becomes what? X cubed. X times a negative 4x becomes what?
Negative 4x squared.
Negative 4x squared. And the x to a negative 5 becomes negative 5x. Alright? Then we're going to do the 3. So we'll do the 3 to the x squared, the 3 to the 4x, and then the 3 to the 5. Okay? So then 3 times x squared becomes positive 3x squared. 3 to the negative 4x becomes negative 12x. And 3 to the negative 5 becomes negative 15. Okay? So then the next step becomes combining like terms. So go through there, which one is a cubed? There's just one, so that's just going to be x cubed. Then I'm going to combine my x squareds. I have a negative 4x squared, and I have a 3x squared. How many x squareds is that? I have a negative 4x squared and a 3x squared. How many x squareds? Just a negative x squared. And then I have a negative 5x and a negative 12x, and that becomes what? Negative 17x. And then minus 15. Okay, and so when you're done, you should not have any, all your exponents should be all wrapped up into one term. Your like ones.
So when you multiply the 3 by x squared, you got x.
Okay, so 5 and 6 are a little bit different in that you have the x minus 2 cubed. So what the x minus 2 cubed? Remember, an exponent means how many times something is being multiplied, right? It's repeated multiplication. So really what this is saying is x minus 2 times x minus 2 times x minus 2. Okay? And so at that point, you're going to do what you did for number 4. Then you would just follow what you just did up above, right? Because now you would do this first, get your answer, simplify it, and then do that, and then add them together. Does that make sense? Okay? And when you do that, your answer should be, you should get x cubed minus 6x squared plus 12x minus 8. Okay, that should be your answer. Okay? Make sense? So this one here, it's the same thing. You need to do, remember the order of operations is PEMDAS. So there's nothing inside to do, inside the parentheses, so now you go to exponents. So make sure you expand this one out first before you multiply by the negative x cubed. So this actually is going to be negative x cubed multiplied by 2x plus 3, and it's being multiplied twice, so 2x plus 3. Okay? So you need to do that. Okay? Now, at this point, you could do the x cubed into this one and that one, and then multiply by that. That's fine. Or you could do this one first. It doesn't matter in which order you do the multiplication. But make sure you realize that when you have something in brackets and it's raised to a power, you have to actually make sure it's being multiplied by itself that many times. Yes?
For number, do we distribute the x cubed?
So what you would do is you would either, you could do this and get your answer, and then when you simplify it, multiply it to this. You're not going to go this, that, and that. You're not going to do that. No, you only do it to 1. Only do it to 1. Good question. Okay? Yes?
So when we solve it all out, do we have to distribute the x through both problems since they'll just come out the same thing and we just add it?
No, you either distribute this to this, and then get your answer, and then whatever your answer is, then distribute to those terms.
Oh.
So you're not going to do this, and then that, and that. You're not going to do that, okay? Because it's like when you have 2 times 3 times 3, you don't take the 2 and multiply to 3 and multiply by the 3 again, do you?
Mm-hmm.
You take the 2, you multiply to the 3, and then you take that answer, multiply to 3, right?
Okay, so either way, you're still distributing the answer from the other one.
Right. Okay, so your answer on this one is going to be negative 4x to the 5th minus 12x to the 4th minus 9x cubed. Okay, so that's going to be your answer. So when you get done, that's what it would be. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so what you do have the homework on, which is the that you had, but also on the back here, you guys, are some practices, okay? So this would be something that I'd like you to work on for some time to kind of get some practice on it. Oops. Okay?
All of them, or which number?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them, okay?
Do we have to do this part as well?
Yes. Okay? So you guys have about 10 minutes to work on this.